I'm just going to let you in on a little bit of a secret. I was umming and ahhing about whether to do this morning, but just let you in on a little behind-the-scenes secret here at NBC. You may have noticed that every Sunday we have someone called a service coordinator who just helps things run smoothly. And for quite some time now, we've had Jonathan and Eli working together. And I saw Eli this morning and I said to him, "So are you our associate service coordinator this morning?" And he just said, "Gee, I hope so." And I just thought, you know what? I love that heart of service. I love that desire, that want to contribute, to do something. So I just want to honour you, Eli. I just think that's fabulous, mate. Thank you so much. Got nothing to do with what I'm talking to you about today, but I just wanted to honour Eli in that way. So on Monday just gone, we gathered as a nation in various places around our country in various ways to take some time to stop, to commemorate, to respect, and to remember sacrifices made on our behalf in military operations throughout the world in order to allow us to live the life of freedom that we live. In about 20 days' time, well, in pretty much exactly 20 days' time, as a nation, we will exercise that freedom. And we will have the opportunity to go and vote for our representatives, the people and the parties and the representatives who we think will be the best to guide our nation, to lead us forward, to help with our lawmaking and the oversight of our freedoms. I forgot my oh, there we go. I forgot I had the clicker in my hand. Now, as Australians, we have a ridiculous amount of freedoms. We are an incredibly free people. I'm sure most of us understand and appreciate and realise that. But we are an incredibly free people in so many ways. And as I was thinking about this idea of freedom, there was a picture that came to mind. Does anyone want to have a guess? Freedom! It's not a very Australian picture. Well, I guess it is in some ways. The illustrious Mel Gibson being an Aussie playing a Scottish guy. But it's got nothing to do with our Australian freedom. But when I thought of an image of freedom, it was the one that came to mind. And I thought I just had to share that this morning. But for those of us who are Jesus followers, for those of us that might wear that label of Christian, did you know that we too have ridiculous amounts of freedom? Freedom is our DNA. Do you believe it? Do you experience it? Do you feel it? Because sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes we don't. But freedom is at the heart of who we are as Jesus people. We are gifted with freedom. Just so happens here at NBC, it's the middle pillar of our vision statement of hope, freedom and transformation through Jesus. Freedom is the core of who we are as Jesus people. Let's have a look at a few verses very quickly that remind us of this. In Luke chapter 4, so the story tells us that Jesus was hanging out in the synagogue and was sitting respectfully and was handed a scroll, the sacred readings, and was invited to read. And he read these words as a declaration of who he was and his mission to the world. And he said, "The Spirit of the Lord is on me, because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for prisoners and the recovery of sight to the blind, to set the oppressed free." In another part of the Bible, in the book of Galatians, or the letter to the church in Galatia, it was written, "It is for freedom that Christ has set us free. Stand firm then and don't let yourselves be burdened again by a yoke of slavery." Freedom is our heartbeat. It's our anthem. 2 Corinthians 3:17 says, "For the Lord is Spirit, and wherever the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom." John 8, Jesus again is speaking, and he said to the people who believed in him, "You are truly my disciples if you remain faithful to my teachings, and you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." So if the Son sets you free, you are indeed free. 1 Peter 2:16, "As God's loving servants, you should live in complete freedom but never use your freedom as a cover-up for evil. Freedom is our heartbeat. Freedom is our song. Now, to those of us perhaps online or in the room who are maybe not yet on the journey yet, maybe not quite ready to wear that badge of being a Christian or being a Jesus follower, I want to let you know that freedom is our heart's song. And I know that the way that sometimes our faith gets wrapped around with religion and religious practices and sometimes religious language, and sometimes that can come across inadvertently in ways that don't sound like freedom. And so for the non-Jesus followers that might be tuning in some way, I just want to apologise that you haven't perhaps gotten a clear message that freedom is what this opportunity and invitation is about. That Jesus was all about bringing a life of freedom, not a life of slavery, not a life of confinement, not a life of being beat down, but a life, an opportunity to live free and open before God. An opportunity, a gift to live completely, honestly, purely, 100% ourselves before God and before those around us. To embrace our mistakes and our failings, knowing that forgiveness is given and offered and that it doesn't define us and it doesn't to define us. It doesn't restrict us is the word that I'm looking for in any way, that our failures and our mistakes that might be called in this category of sin are actually not going to interrupt how God feels towards us and are not going to stop his love towards us. And they're not going to change who we are, and they're not going to put us in a confine, in a jail of guilt or condemnation. In Romans chapter 8, it tells us there is no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. Freedom is our cry. And so for those perhaps who haven't bought into the Jesus thing yet, I just want to invite you into a life of freedom. And I want to let you off the hook a little bit, because in a minute I'm just going to change gears and talk to the people who are the Jesus followers. And so if that's not you, maybe you just need to sit in this space for a while and just say, maybe you're close and you're kind of like, all right, God, well, if you're there and if you're interested in me, show me this freedom. Help me know this freedom. Reveal this freedom to me. So over the next couple of minutes while I chat to the Jesus followers, maybe you want to read through your Bible and look at the stories of Jesus and see the freedom that he offered to so many people. I'm not sure. So Donna brilliantly read this Bible reading for us today. And as she said, it was a letter by a guy named Paul to the church in a place called Corinth. And so he's writing to the Jesus followers. He's writing to the Christians, as we might label it today. And he's offering what you might call some coaching or some training, some encouragement to those people who live in a very complicated and confusing society, and a society that looked very, very different to ours. And so for the Jesus people in the room, online, I want to invite you to journey with me in this. And as we kind of unpack these kind of bizarre and strange statements that Paul makes in his pre-game coaching speech. So here's this society in Corinth, a crazy society where they worshipped all kinds of idols and gods, and they had all sorts of ideas and ideologies. And it wasn't a society built on Christian principles and morals. That's actually, if you trace the history back, our society is one built on Christian principles and morals. And, this is before, who was that guy? Constantine, who declared Christianity as the religion of Rome and kind of built society then on that structure. This is before that. And it's very much lots of different gods, and people would engage in all sorts of wild and woolly practices that very often involve things like sacrifices, where they would bring meat and other produce to the temple of their god, and where they would offer that in some way as part of this religious practice. And so Paul is talking to these people who live in this society where this is going on around them. And he says to these people, don't feel like you need to go to the butcher's shop and grill the butcher about where the meat has come from. Don't feel like you need to. You have more freedom than that. Because we know that God is the creator of all, that God has gifted it all to us, that these other idols and gods are nothing and they don't really mean anything. Now, just prior to this, just by way of reference, he's actually offered some instruction to the people about don't participate. Don't ruin your freedom by participating in these religious rituals and these religious practices to other gods. Don't kind of tie yourself to that, which is just going to confuse things and reduce your freedom and just make things a whole lot more difficult and strange and complicated for you. Don't tie yourself into that stuff. So he's already warned them against, don't get involved in the religious practices. But don't feel like you need to make life difficult for your butcher by asking him to provide you with a paper trail of exactly where this meat's come from, and so that he can prove to you that in fact it has not been offered to some idol in some temple over the hill before it's been brought into the markets to be available for sale. Don't second guess yourself about these things. You live in freedom. You have freedom. And he unpacks this idea. And the crux of this, what it really comes down to, is a couple of key verses that just really jump out. And I just want to highlight these couple of verses from what Paul is really trying to say to the people here. And I think he kind of sums it up in this. And this is from a different translation to what Donna read to us. But I like the way this phrases it. It says, looking at it one way, you could say anything goes. Because of God's immense generosity and grace, we don't have to dissect and scrutinise every action to see if it will pass muster. Isn't that encouraging? Isn't it great that we don't have to just double check with our butcher that the meat hasn't been offered to an idol before it's come in? But the point is not just to get by. We want to live well. And our foremost efforts should be to help others live well. I kind of want to put a 2 on the end of that, to help others live well too. I think what Paul, I think one of the key things that he's trying to say here to us is we don't need to get hung up and second guess and question in depth and just get really burdened in our freedom. He says it's really quite simple. Let's ask the question, is this going to help me? And is it going to help those around me live well? Is this decision going to help me live well? And what impact might that have on those around me? For those of us that are Jesus followers, we've probably heard that statement of Jesus when he was asked to sum up what's all the rules, all the laws, all the commandments, all the religious hoops that you have to jump through. What's the most important one, Jesus? There's so many. And Jesus says, so many? It's pretty quite straightforward. All you need to do is just summarise it in love God with all your heart, soul, mind, strength, and love your neighbour as you love yourself. Love God, love yourself, love your neighbour. Is this decision going to help me and help those around me live well? As I was kind of reading behind some of this stuff, reading some scholarly books and things like that, there was one that I read that made this statement. I thought it was worth sharing. He says, what the believer eats does not matter. That he avoids giving offence does. That he avoids giving offence, that he considers the needs of those around him, those who might be influenced by him, those that might surround him, who might be in some way impacted by that decision. What the believer eats does not matter. That he avoids giving offence in what he eats does, is what that particular person was trying to say. And so, in that reading, as Donna read it to us, he talks about if someone for some reason feels that it's important to them to tell you that the meat's been sacrificed to an idol, there's obviously something in that for that person. And so if they bring that to your attention, there's something going on in that room out of consideration for them, just don't eat the meat. And this isn't an isolated example. He actually talks about this a number of times. If you flick back a couple of chapters, in 1 Corinthians chapter 8, he has a very similar conversation. And then there's another one in Romans chapter 14 where he says very, very similar things. And then in the book of Philippians, he's talking about having the mind of Jesus. And he invites us and he says, look not only to your own interests, but to the interests of others. Can you hear this echo? Can you hear this opportunity for us to live in freedom? We don't have to second guess everything. We simply need to ask ourselves, is this going to help me and those around me live well? What an incredible gift of freedom. Jesus demonstrated this. In that passage I read from Luke chapter 4 before, we get this picture given to us that Jesus is sitting respectfully in the synagogue, in the place of worship, in their church, I guess, in his culture. And he's sitting respectfully and he's asked to read from the sacred writings, the scrolls, and so he in consideration for those in that setting and in that space, he respects what's going on and respects those, and then he stands and he reads from the scrolls, and then he goes on to share his heart from those things, which was the way it was done. The same Jesus at times would go and party with tax collectors and so-called sinners as they were considered at the time. As I believe he asked the question, what is going to help these people live well? What's going to draw them deeper into the freedom that God has for them? I'm not going to be able to do that at a distance. I need to be in relationship with these people. And so he attended, quite controversially, parties and events that others kind of frowned on in the interests of those that were around him in those moments and in order to connect with them. In one story, it tells us that Jesus, in the interests of the person who had come with a particular need, he allowed a person to wash his feet. Again, a cultural thing that we probably don't have a lot of deep connection to. But he allowed someone else in one instance to come and wash his feet out of consideration for what that person needed. And in another instance, Jesus himself took the towel and bowl, again quite controversially, and washed the feet of his disciples in the interests of those that were around him. And so he had the freedom to have his feet washed and the freedom to wash feet. He had the freedom to sit in the synagogue and be respectful of what was happening in that space. And he had the freedom to get outside of that and to be in amongst the tax collectors and sinners in the parties around the place. As I was thinking about this, I couldn't help but think about something that Brett said last week. For those who know me or perhaps have seen me around, you know it's probably, I think it's fair to say it's quite unusual to see me dressed in this manner. I have for a very long time been very passionate about colour. And I find men's fashion so infuriatingly boring. Grey, black, brown, and maybe if you're lucky, tan. And let's be honest, guys, tan's just brown anyway, right? And what's peach? That's a fruit, not a colour. Anyway, I digress. And so my freedom, one of my ways I express my freedom is I love to wear colour. And so Brett almost dared me to wear my happy pants today. Now, let me just give you, for those that maybe can't really picture this. So these are my favourite happy pants. I love these pants. Sadly, they are not able to be worn anymore because they are 30 years old. Maybe more than 30 years old. I don't know. How long ago was 1992? Anyway, so I love to express the freedom that I have to wear colour. But, as I was thinking about that today, I thought, you know what? There are people who'll be tuning in online. There are people in our audience who have a great deal of respect and appreciation and consideration for the honour of being able to stand up here and share in this way. And to choose to wear my happy pants just for the sake of kicks and giggles, just to exercise my freedom in that way, may cause offence to some of those people. It may cause discomfort. It may prevent them from hearing something that maybe for some crazy reason God might want to use me to say to them. And so today I went to the other extreme. And it may not happen again real quickly, and chose to exercise my freedom to wear something that dignified and honoured what was going on here. And dignified and honours those who dignify and honour what's going on here in that way and in that manner. And so my choosing to eat meat or to not eat meat today looks like this. Because I don't want to cause someone else to stumble. Now, for those who are afraid that maybe I'm losing who I am, I do have my Parramatta socks on underneath. So just in the interest of full disclosure. But I was thinking about this and I was thinking, so what does not eating meat or eating meat like this Paul guy was talking about look like for us today? And I've thought of some examples and I want to share a couple of examples with you. And I hope that they won't be too overwhelming or confronting. You may have other examples. There may be something else that God wants to speak to your heart today about what eating meat or not eating meat might look like for you. But here's a few that I thought of. I thought, for some of us there may be some people who on this journey of pursuing Jesus enjoy a glass of wine with dinner or an alcoholic beverage, and it's not an issue, it's not something that dominates life, there's no concern or worry about that, diminishing them. It helps, it doesn't diminish them from living well, it's not an addiction issue, it's not... And they can choose to exercise their freedom in that way. Now, just for the record, for those who understand the Salvation Army, for those of us as soldiers who wear the uniform, we make a particular choice about that. And I'm not talking about those people in this context, but there may be people out there who live this way who then become aware of someone, or more than become aware of someone, have a friend or someone they know and trust and have a relationship with, who actually struggles with alcoholism. And maybe, let's just take this idea right to an extreme, maybe that person that struggles with alcoholism actually currently has nowhere to live. And the person who has no issue here, who enjoys a glass of wine, who enjoys the freedom to drink a glass of wine with dinner perhaps, has something within them that says, I would really like to offer my spare bedroom to this person I know who struggles with alcoholism. And in that moment, in that example, the choice to eat meat or not to eat meat might mean it's time to move all the alcohol out of the house for a while. It's time to live a life without that for a little while in the interests of this person beside me who I want to support and encourage, who I don't want to be a stumbling block to. Perhaps that's what eating meat or not eating meat looks like for us today. Or maybe there are some people who have an investment property, and the investment property and the current rental market allows them to live very comfortably, a little bit of cream on top, enjoy some of the nicer things of life because of the extra income that might come from the investment property. And they have the freedom to do that, and that's magnificent. What a great country we live in that we can do that. And yet they might hear about the tragic housing crisis that exists across our nation. And they might go, I have the freedom to charge full market rent for my property, and I have the freedom to go, you know what, I'm just going to sit down and do the sums and just work out what this property costs me to have. My repayments, my rates, whatever it is, the costs around this property. And I'm going to have a chat to someone that I know who's having trouble finding housing. I'm going to offer them my investment property for the bare minimum that I can possibly afford to allow them to get out of housing crisis. Or perhaps I'll have a chat to Salvo's Housing and say, what would it look like for me to offer my investment property to you for your housing stock so that you can use that to help people who are in housing crisis? How can I do that in a way that my finances can afford? And maybe it means that I need to not eat meat, so to speak. I need to remove some of the cream. Maybe I'll choose not to live quite as comfortably as I might normally do in order to help I continue to live well, and I can help someone else live well around me. Perhaps a little bit to some degree more light-hearted, but at the same time, I think it's a relevant illustration. Some of us might love a good borscht. Anyone love a good borscht? I think there's probably most people in the room going, what on earth is a borscht? A borscht is a beetroot delicacy from Russia. And maybe I might love a borscht. And maybe I've got a colleague at work from Ukraine or a friend down the street. And when they smell my borscht, it brings back memories, or it takes them to a place that just makes them face the harsh, horrible realities of the world that their loved ones might live in. And maybe for a little while, as much as I love my borscht, I might need to stop eating borscht for a little while. Out of consideration for my Ukrainian neighbour, I can continue to live well, and I can consider how my choosing not to eat meat can help them live well. And my last example today, and I'm sure that you can think of others, and maybe none of these are relevant to you, and that's okay. But in 20 days' time, when we go and consider who might be best to represent us as a nation at the end of this election, we might carefully consider all of the options and alternatives and all the candidates, and we might find that ultimately our final decision comes down to a choice between religious freedoms that allow me to express my faith in comfort and fairly comfortably and easily. I don't live with too much threat or concern, and I can choose religious freedom, or I can choose justice for refugees. And if that's what my decision comes down to, what does it look like to not eat meat with my vote? Or maybe it's about taxes for churches and fair treatment of First Nations people in our criminal justice system. How can I continue to live well and help those around me live well with my vote? How can I eat meat and not eat meat in my freedoms? Can I trust that God will hold me? Can I believe what I say that I believe about my freedoms, that God is with me, He will see me through anything? And if I begin to suffer religious persecution because of my choice to invite justice for others, maybe God will see me through that. Am I going to believe what I say to be true about God and choose not to eat meat? Now, please don't mishear me. I'm not telling you how to vote. You need to consider the options and the circumstances and the situations, and there's a lot to consider in this. But I want us to consider, even in that, how do I exercise my freedom in a way that helps me live well and helps others live well as well? Because for us today, I think maybe that's what it is to eat meat or not eat meat in our freedoms that we enjoy. I'm going to invite the music team to come. And as I do, I want to speak first to the Jesus followers, to the Christians, to those in the room. I want to go back to where we started and ask, are you fully experiencing freedom? Do you know the freedom of being a Jesus follower? Do you feel free? And in a moment, we're going to have some music. Our prayer team will come out the front. There'll be a prayer line number that will come up as well. For those in our online congregation, and maybe you just want some prayer to re-experience the freedom of being a Jesus follower. Maybe you're tired of living a life that's enslaved to self. You want a life that makes a real difference for others. You want to use your freedom in a way that gives purpose and meaning and depth to your life as you consider what helps you live well and helps those live well around you. Maybe you want, as a Jesus follower, some prayer for wisdom for 20 days' time as you consider who you might choose to elect to lead our nation. And that opportunity will be there. I will just do this. Because, we've got our prayer line number, and that'll come up on the bottom of the screen for those in our online congregation. But, sometimes I think for some of us in the room, it can be scary to stand up and walk out the front in front of a whole bunch of people and ask for prayer. And so I want people in the room to know that you can use that number too, that you can send a text message and ask the prayer team to pray for you. and someone will probably give you a call back. Maybe make sure your phone's on silent in case it happens while we're still in the room, but that's there for you too. So maybe you want to embrace more of what freedom looks like for you as a Jesus follower. I want to come back to those people I talked to and talked about who are the not yet Jesus followers. And I wonder, is freedom something that you long for? Is freedom something that you need and that you desire? And maybe for you, some of the people living in freedom, some of the Jesus followers you've encountered, haven't yet learnt how to make that choice of what might be good for me and for those around me. And they've made some choices that have not been good for you. And I'm so sorry that we haven't always got it right and haven't always learnt those lessons. And maybe today you've got a glimpse of some freedom that might be able to come to you. And so I want to invite you too into this space. I would love for you to experience some of the freedom that we know, that I know. I just want to ask everyone who's in the room if we would just close our eyes just for a moment. I just want us to think, particularly those of us who maybe have not yet got on board with the whole Jesus thing. And I just wonder, are you drowning in a self-focused, selfish world? Are you experiencing like the waves of the ocean, the stresses and the pressures, and you feel that current just pulling you along through life, and you know that you're definitely not free? You're drowning in it. You're not free to relax. You're not free to float. You're definitely not free to swim, because all you can do is survive. And if that's you, if you're in that ocean, when that happens to us in the real ocean, how do we get the lifesaver's attention? We simply stick up our hand as we struggle to keep our head above water. All we do is stick up our hand and the lifesaver does the rest. Well, let me tell you, Jesus is your lifesaver and he wants to bring freedom to you. And so with every eye closed in this room today, I just want to ask if there are some people who are drowning in this selfish, self-focused world, in this rules, overwhelmed, crazy world, and you want some freedom, and maybe Jesus might offer it. I just want to invite you just to stick your hand up like you would if you were drowning in the ocean. You can just stick it up. You can put it straight back down again. The lifesaver has seen you. For those online, as you stick your hand up, whether that's physically in your lounge room or in your heart, the lifesaver sees and is coming to you, has come to you. He does it all. You simply stick up your hand and say, I need help, and he comes to you. And then he will put you on his board. He will sail you through those waters and will journey with you to learn a new way of living in this ocean. I just love to pray right now. I'm going to pray for those people that put their hand up. I'll pray for us all in general. Our prayer team will come, the music team will lead us, and we'll have some moments just to reflect on our own freedom today. Would you join me as I pray? Loving God, I come to you today and I thank you that you are our rescuer to bring us freedom. Freedom from those waves that want to crush us and drown us. Freedom from those rips that want to drag us off our feet and make us feel out of control. And God, for each person who've put their hand up today physically or perhaps in their hearts, I thank you that you have seen them and that you come to them to bring your rescue and to bring your freedom. We celebrate that today, the freedom that has come and is coming in the days before us. For those of us who are on the journey with Jesus, trying to unpack, how do I continue to live well? How do I continue to live in relationship with God? Not to sacrifice that, not to get caught up in other things that are going to remove my heart and mind from you, God, and going to remove some of my freedom. How do I continue to live well and to exercise that beautiful, wonderful freedom in a way that helps others live well as well? God, give us wisdom in these challenging thoughts. Help us not to question where the meat comes from, but simply to embrace our freedom in consideration of others. Give us wisdom as we understand what that looks like for us each. We thank you for the freedoms we have in so many ways. We thank you for this land that we live in. And we thank you most of all for Jesus, the freedom giver. Meet with us by your Holy Spirit, I pray. Challenge us, I pray. Guide us, I pray. Amen. Amen.